Okay, thank you. Right, thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us. My name's Matt. I'm from CloudGuard. Delighted to be hosting the next in the series of our webinars. This one, we're going to tackle the art of deception. It's evolving very rapidly, both a combination of deeper personalization, also volumetrics, of course, they're always in the mix, as well as social engineering methods using AI and automation. So we're going to explore this. We're going to delve into some of those tactics, some of those techniques, some of those procedures that are being adopted by the communities of nefarious actors and deceivers, and understand how, it always finds a way. In the next teardown webinar, we're going to be looking at the lines of defense. I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague, senior SOC analyst and automation engineer, John. John, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Matt. So I've been with CloudGuard for a good few years now, 3.5 years. Work primarily in the SOC automation engineering space, helping build the various different capabilities that we have to defend various different scenarios, automating the process.
And John is also the head of our Fakery workshop as well. So we're going to come on to that in just a second. But to give some structure to this webinar for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to delve into the art of trust. That's the fundamental emotion that the deceivers are trying to target here. We're going to look at other intrinsic human nature behaviors. Those include curiosity, how the art of fear is used very much against us. How that is often sort of compiled with and associated with creating greater senses of urgency, how personalization is becoming more apparent in a lot of the reconnaissance, all the way through to obviously the actual accuracy of the attack, how all of this is coming together to engineer deceit. And then we're going to take you into the Fakery lab that John runs, and we're actually going to do a deep fake. So we're going to do an actual Deepfake. We're going to talk you through how we've done it. We're going to play it. It is a deepfake on me. And yes, I'm still talking to John, even though he did it. And then we're going to look at how that affects instinct and apply this throughout, in terms of real world lessons that we've all seen, and, actually give you that correlation between the two. So without further ado, just to say towards the end, we will go into the Fakery lab. We will look at actually how we took public content and how we put that into a final composition and play that for your review. And then we'll wrap up. But let's just start off at the very beginning here. So what is deception? What are what we call in the cyber world TTPs? Helps understand and break down these language barriers, because deception is the deliberate act of causing someone to believe something or someone, or it could be both, is true when it's actually false. And it's a fundamental tactic that's in every single social engineering cyber incident we see right now, to varying degrees, and it can be layered as well. But we often associated, the deception with different techniques. And because it's being layered, we refer to these as TTPs, or tactics, the why, the strategic goal of the objective of the attacker. Many times that's associated with monetary gain. It isn't always, but again, the motives for understanding this as they compile an attack, as they do reconnaissance, as they build an understanding of the target, they will have a goal in mind. They have techniques they use. These can be many, varied, and multi-layered. So again, we're going to break down the attack methodology and just show you what that looks like in these various attacks, how they achieve the tactics, and the how. So this is the more specific detail, how reconnaissance comes together, how reconnaissance is being done on us. And again, as we lead into the next webinar, we're going to be exposing obviously what we can do, obviously to understand when that's taking place, because it's not always visible, and how we sort of talk through when we break that down. Because when we look at human nature, we are, and one of humanity's greatest strengths, we are trusting by nature, right? It enables human interaction. It's been essential for survival forever. When we have blind trust, we have to have blind trust, whether it's in medical care, whether it's in legal support, whether it's in religion, whatever it might be. That blind trust enables humans to interact with one another, and we're wired by default to reciprocate, and the vast majority of people do. If people need help, a good number of people will always try and help out, whatever the situation is. And actually, the zero trust methodology is really hard in many organizations to implement and to maintain, because skepticism isn't necessarily a default behavior of human beings, and we do suffer from optimism bias, and that creates a real problem, because other humans will target that and see that as a weakness. And AI, as it now is, it doesn't suffer. It has no self-preservation instinct. It has no emotional comfort, and it has no truest sense of personal future. Now, those assets in themselves get used as weaknesses by the perpetrators, by the deceivers here, as one of their greatest weapons. They use psychological framing and different TTPs. Whether it's a brief connection, whether it is one that's built over time to deceive, to build trust, or even initiate some form of mistake. And you will repeatedly see in the examples that the action is really straightforward. It's really simple. What they're trying to do is take the next step, in that technique, in terms of getting access to systems to execute some form of data exfiltration and or compromise. And indeed, just that simple mistake of allowing that in. If you take the Uber example last year, there were over 1,100 MFA requests that were being sent. In a very short period of time, it took just one of those to be approved, as it does in that, MFA saturation type attack, overwhelming certain security systems or overwhelming targeted users in terms of gaining access into an environment. And if that fails, where reciprocity fails, then they can move to other human emotions to target. So curiosity, excitement and engagement through deeper personalization or content. Because we're suffering from optimism bias in that sense, and AI is not. AI doesn't have to feel safe like humans do, and it can be confident, and it can remove emotion from any part of that basis of attack. So as the attacker starts to formulate, obviously, their tactics within an attack, they're going to look to break down the intrinsic human nature that we have. And 98% of all humans exhibit a universal capacity for cooperation. It is no surprise that 98% of all attacks involve some form or multiple levels of social engineering, and they are principally and initially targeting for human emotions. Now, it's well versed that it's very much associated with curiosity and fear. And it's also, reasonably well understood in terms of urgency, and obviously triggering in some people, to a lesser extent, greed as part of simultaneous or multi-layer blended social engineering attacks as they take place. Now, what we see absolutely in attacks is that the key trigger they're trying to get to is to bypass our human intrinsic behavior to use critical thinking. Is this right? Does this feel right? And actually go through those range of verification checks that are hardwired in us as human beings. And the way that attackers are thinking about this, very simply, is to create familiarity in patterns of behavior, so we are less suspicious by default. And I'm no psychologist here, but if you just look at the attacks and the attacks we're just about to walk through, it is by creating familiarity that we increase the comfort level in humans, and AI doesn't suffer from that. But they also have a very low expectation. It obviously can be much higher, and that's all goodness to them. But again, they work on a volumetric-based system. That is why, despite all of the best defenses that we have, we are still receiving large volumes of phishing and spear phishing emails. And we are seeing, attempts to come around the side through different communication channels, whether it's, real-time messaging platforms or it's social platforms that we're engaging with, in order to evade levels of detection, but obviously to execute the build-up of a relationship, the build-up of a basis of trust, or indeed to get a level of interest. So it is a volume-based game. Only 1% has to succeed. And again, through automation and AI, they can do that extremely cost effectively, as we will show. Now, we're curious by default. And actually, that is a very powerful trigger for the deceiver to look at there and enter into in deployment. So Okay, create irresistible content here. So that's going to drive curiosity. Curiosity, which doesn't mean you have to click on something now. You can hover over it and it will immediately auto, connect you to the service. And again, the goal there, the tactic that's being deployed is to get some form of information, some form of credentials out of you. Click on the link, take you to that, get better engagement, understand more about you if it's reconnaissance. And if that doesn't work, then we can use fear of missing out. So we know that much more personalized, much more research content has a much higher click-through rate. And again, because the tooling, because of AI, it's so much more effective in terms of drawing people into those conversations, and to do it by association, then that is a very common tactic. And if that isn't enough, then they can use anxiety, because ultimately human behavior suffers here. We're using a 200,000-year-old curiosity system, and we're trying to match that up and defend against a 20-year-old digital system, which is being used against us right now. So we need to be mindful of these different layers in which attacks and the deceiver can build attacks are taking place. And we'll actually look at this in the context of what most of us will be receiving on a weekly basis in terms of an email. And we can see in the bottom corner, the barometer here, we've moved past it mustn't be true, and we're moving into fear. And fear is being generated by the blue text in the middle there, the security alert. So it is triggering an automatic capacity, to impair our decision making, because okay, I need to pay some attention here. So I'm being drawn into this already. We think someone else has accessed your account. That's a concern. That's a concern to anybody. So the verification process, the human emergency response system, is saying, where's this come from? And actually this email has come in and appears to be genuine by all accounts. It's come in, it's very targeted, but it also drives a very simple action, which is just click on the recover account box, and you will see the consistency in these emails. We've all seen them. Again, it's a very basic structure, but this is incredibly common, and it can be mass produced. So we go back to the volumetric side of this. The point is, you have got the onus on you as that end user to either ignore it or understand whether or not it's genuine. And that is the fear factor that's being injected into us in terms of the art of fear from the deceiver. So what this is trying to do is give an instant activation. The goal here is to get you as the recipient of this email to click on that recover account. What the deceiver is also doing is probably taking you to a genuine web page where they're trying to harvest credentials. It could be through various techniques. You may or may not have safe links as part of the security on the device or on the phone, which you could be on the move, it could be out of hours. But again, it's very difficult if you're doing all the right things here to not actually be experiencing high volumes of these and actually just click on one of them. It could be genuine as well, because we know that this is very carefully mapped to the genuine article. If you take this a stage further and you look at how research and reconnaissance moves to the next level, here we have an example. So late last year, about December 24, all the way through 2025, we've seen the active abuse of active and genuine accounts in electronic contract and signature platforms. In this case, we've used DocuSign as a very popular one. But again, it's a genuine account. So by all accounts, if you click on it, it will take you into the platform. The research that's been done here has come through to you. They will understand who you're engaging with, whether through partnership, supply chain, or engagement in contract negotiations. And you have a need for this, so it will correlate, and the work will have been done in the reconnaissance stage here. So there isn't a huge amount of fear, but there's an act now. There's an act now request. So again, we're shortening that time window. And you'll see right in the middle there, it's very simple. Just click on the review and sign page. What that will do is take you into the genuine DocuSign. And again, the attackers and the deceivers here are very much looking at this from a point of view of, okay, we can use a PDF, but in a PDF, we can't actually embed dynamic malware content. So in the last 6 months, what we've seen is a shift away from using PDFs and into using applications or even image related material that does support dynamic content. So those could be SVGs, vector graphics, or otherwise, which enable you to look like a PDF, but actually when you click on it, the graphic itself allows the malware, or the payload as we refer to it, to be activated and obviously get through to the device and either to execute or obviously to harvest credentials. So you can see here that although this looks relatively simple, quite a large amount of research and personalization is required. And it will be done in terms of creating the context and the narrative for the reason that you are receiving this and a reason to click on that link. Again, the ulterior motive here from the deceiver is to get instant activation, just for you to click on that link. Another popular angle, obviously, many users use document management, case management, and document storage systems like SharePoint. In this case, our colleague Mina has been sent one. The access request is for company profile pictures, which may be accessible to certain groups, if not every employee within the business, so they can look it up and they can see, obviously, the colleagues that they're working with. But we're adding emotional layering and blending here because it's actually very difficult to see context, whether this was genuine or not, in terms of this request being made by Mina, but a simple accept or decline. And again, safe links wouldn't pick this up necessarily. So it would go to a genuine site, and from there, it obviously goes into the next stage of process. So in terms of fear, there isn't a huge fear factor. We've got to decipher here very quickly whether this is genuine or not. The ulterior motive, you can see on the barometer, moves into breach because actually, the ulterior motive here is to get access to company profile pictures, ID and information that could enhance reconnaissance that's currently taking place. So the email is genuine. It's come from within the organization. In this case, it's been spoofed. So it has legitimacy. We've got to go a stage further to verify that. But it is creating fear of pressure. I can accept that from an employee, and obviously it could give access and it may not be genuine. I may decline that and it may create subsequent issues. So there's a fear of authority, and some of these can be time limited as well. And as we're going to start to introduce these layers, time pressure and urgency becomes an increasing factor, as you will see. Again, what's the ulterior motive here from the deceiver? It's driving instant activation, and a very popular one for a very long period of time. And you can begin to see the narrative here. So the actual call to action is still exactly the same. You've got to log into your account and click on the link below. It's a genuine email. It's passed your security systems. It's passed your email security checks. It's coming from a genuine account in Bank of America in this case. It happens for all banks. And it's saying that we've detected unusual activity. Now, this will be researched. This will be timed and targeted at people in the organization involved in finance, in payroll, and targeted at more senior roles within the business as well. It could include and be related not just to banks, but to public bodies that are dealing with personal identifiable information. With financial services and financial matters, what you're seeing is an act now, imperative, but it's actually being brought to bear at the end of the month. So it could be associated with running payroll, it could be paying suppliers, it could be receiving funds as well. So again, this becomes more timely and more pertinent in terms of unusual activity taking place within your account and having to take action to verify whether this is genuine or not. Sometimes it can come from no reply accounts and it makes it more difficult to validate. And that's by design again. So you're investing time to go and find that out. But again, attackers have got to think about that verification step, and is it going to lead to failure from their efforts? So in extreme examples, we're going to see there's going to be threat to life. You've seen a very recent example with a children's kindergarten facility where they've obviously done a successful cyber attack. They've recovered images from that particular incident, and again have not received a positive initial response in terms of ransomware, and have used the information to go to the parents of the children themselves. So there are no morals in any of this, and we shouldn't assume that from the parties that are executing this, and they will go to extreme levels as we're now seeing. But ultimately, the message here is moving through into the next phase of human emotion. We are sensing more urgency coming into each of these emails. Now, that sense of urgency can go through layers in terms of how attacks are being developed. There's fear of impact. So you saw from the last email, okay, it's going to come towards the end of the month. It's going to target very particular people within an organization. It could relate to account suspension or a charge dispute. It could be final notice before legal action. It could be an overdue payment. Everything will yield down to a fear of impact, to avoid disruption taking place. And if that isn't, and that doesn't actually succeed in terms of that attack narrative, you can see a more condensed time window take place. So it could be the same day. It could be a transfer to market close. We've got to settle this. It could be credentials reset within the hour. That is a genuine requirement of a lot of password reset tools. And again, it can be even shorter than that. It could be a compliance deadline, or it could be an order return if we don't hear or have a response by this time date. So timing is everything to the perpetrators and the deceivers here. It could also be a more emotional element to this. So a data breach is detected, irregular activity, as we've just seen in that attack, a process failure, a fake delivery, particularly where those are more common, and authority-based requests. And we'll see that when we go through the next set of examples. But finally, and slightly tangentially, in the longer term deceptions that are taking place, you'll see familiarity build over time, or even try to do that very quickly, as we'll see in a second. But there's a sudden change, or there is a favor request or a process addition. All of this is adding into something that will need verifying, or something that's been built up over time in terms of that deception and that level of trust. Now, it could be they've taken a genuine account and compromised that as well. So understanding if the people that you're dealing with are genuinely the people you're dealing with, particularly with deepfake technology, is becoming increasingly more complex, as we'll see here. So many of us will be very, very familiar with this. So Mina in our team, has received an innocuous LinkedIn request, unexpected, but simple request here, very common. I've noticed we're both in the same manufacturing cybersecurity space. We've got several mutual connections. So it's building an affiliation, an acknowledgement that, they're moving in the same circles. Been following the posts about industrial security, really insightful. So a bit of praise, trying to build rapport and relationship. Would love to connect. Senior security architect at Accenture. So this looks like a genuine role in a really big organization. So Mina's in this space, very interested in it, would love to speak to somebody from Accenture, and does accept that. And immediately there's a follow-up, and we'll all recognize this. Okay, so Sarah's immediately responded, thanks for connecting. Saw your experience with operational technology. We're actually facing the same challenges. Currently working on a research project. So trying to build familiarity, trying to build trust through this relationship. In UK manufacturing, your background is incredibly valuable. So more vanity, more praise coming into this to try and build more rapport. Would like to open a quick 15-minute call. Happy to share preliminary findings. So we're giving some value back to this that may be useful for Mina and her career progression. And she may like to very much actually have that 15-minute call with Sarah from Accenture. Also putting together a brief survey for industry professionals. Here's the link, tiny URL link, look forward to connecting. So pretty innocuous. Many of these can be genuine as well, but how many of these do we receive on a daily basis? Of course, the tiny URL is actually a malicious link disguised within the survey. Now, safe links might not pick that up. It might go to a genuine site that looks perfectly normal. The payload is concealed underneath a dynamic vector graphic or underneath some other code that's being executed, which is then going to run and is going to be very difficult to detect. So what's going on? Why is LinkedIn, such a popular channel in taking this forward? So let's tear it down. So reconnaissance we can't see, right? It's taking place, it's discrete, limited awareness or traceability, multiple sources. We'll tear that down in some more detail in a minute. You can see the hooks. There were specific references to the same areas, profile, bit of vanity, really credible company and role within that senior role, and reference to mutual connections. And you'll find it very common that people are setting up lots of fake LinkedIn profiles and building up some kind of association. So when you're clicked on and you checked, you can actually verify that quite quickly. It's building trust, so offering value in exchange once actually the connection was made, showing professional courtesy, lots of common use of specific language, and real reference points are in there. It went to a genuine web page. So you can then see this step up. It gets into personalization, active interests, value being readily recognized, faster and more engaging, references the post between them. So they've got some commonality there. And then you get to the payload execution. So credible link was executed. It wasn't detected. It was image-based with dynamic malware behind it. We've also seen calendar invites used. They've all got the same endpoint, which is credential harvesting. Here we see another really common one. So there's been a big focus. We've changed the barometer slightly on this one. So we've moved into new employees. It affects existing employees in businesses less, as you'll see, because actually if you look at a new employee, their experiences and the barometer is different because they don't have a normal baseline for what they're going to receive as email as they start in a new role in a new business. You could also, argue that there's more approval seeking, more fear of failure. You don't want to fail as soon as you started a role. There's more information asymmetry and verification isolation. You don't know who to go to. You don't know who to ask or who to escalate to verify what's done, particularly if you're working remotely. And 92% of companies in the last 6 months have been really, really heavily targeted here. The reconnaissance, the research in the deceiver is really good. So they understand the benefit system that organizations are signed up to, what that's going to look like. You can see from the layout of this and the attack elevation, it's highly curated, it's highly researched. Your benefits are coming. The simple ask is just click on the view benefits link. So again, this is using a slightly different spin. Again, it's going to work less effectively on employees moving within organizations because they're not going to have some of those barometer elements. But it's looking at exploiting onboarding gap, and that might even occur before someone's started. They know somebody's moving, and they know that email is going to be dormant and probably going to need a password reset of some description while it's onboarded for MFA, prime time to attack. So that's one of the big reasons there's such a bad actor focus on this particular area in terms of generating deception and getting that, obviously, that access into the environment. But okay, let's look at what that means in other linked attacks. So where's this research, where's this reconnaissance coming from? Well, it's coming from much deeper behavioral analysis, most of it AI driven, most of it originates or starts with LinkedIn. And then it's correlated with other environments. So they're looking at personal details, professional associations, colleagues, etc., in businesses or previous businesses, family associations. They're trying to build a very dynamic, very automated view, an opinion of the job role, the context, the social connections, as well as research behavioral patterns. And when we talk about behavioral patterns, we're getting personal. Okay, so that personal and personalization is a combination of social profiling. So we're looking at posting details, online activities. All of this is being done through automation now. So the heavy lifting is now very cost effective and extremely accurate and very quick. Communication patterns, language, comments, likes, styles, relationship networks. We can build influence maps really quickly of that and get deep behavioral and very accurate contextual analysis using AI to content preferences, interests. And ultimately here we're aiming at engagement patterns from a deceiver point of view. You come right back to the beginning and looking at your TTPs, right? Curating that really hyper engaging content. That's what this is driving in terms of let's see this in, let's understand, let's learn more, let's see what gets clicked on. And again, you can use this to obviously drive it and make it more personal, but ultimately we're thinking about impersonation here. If we can actually get the credentials, fantastic, but that fake LinkedIn reconnaissance is the highest value one being leveraged at this moment. How many of us are receiving overwhelming quantities via LinkedIn of recruiter, of supplier, of sales leads, pushes, podcast host, and even prestige awards? Yeah, they are targeting employees with exciting news. These are nurtured over several exchanges, links provided. Ultimate goal here, obviously the technique is harvesting credentials for impersonalization. They can take you to a website which they control. They've got the traffic analysis. They can determine frequency of visits, brands that are coming in. They can scrape, copy, misdirect, hijack sites as well. So it appears a lot more legitimate. But again, the ultimate aim here, very quickly moving in and out of this without detection and credential harvesting into impersonation. And again, social profiling. So they're looking at way more than LinkedIn and business. They're looking at meals, food, sports, family, holidays, awards. Ultimately, if you can land your business email compromise or spear phishing with knowledge of somebody being out of office, A lot of businesses are known, particularly smaller businesses, to really struggle. When people travel abroad, you've got to allow for international travel, obviously different network connections. And again, obviously that out of office creates not an awareness in everybody within the business of a gap within a workflow or a role. And again, impersonation can obviously be somewhat easier at that point in time. And they'll start tracking family connections, using that, automatically mapping those associations, likes for technology, or other things that are being posted in social trends, just to get intonation, just to improve the accuracy and level of engagement. And the biggest area that we have seen an increase in is targeting system administrators. And we're about to see this in the example. So this can be sending through security assessment results. A lot of bad actors, a lot of deceivers are obviously using that as a way in, not necessarily a ransom attack, but a preventative precursor to a ransomware attack. We've seen, particularly with the BBC's recent publication, large rewards. We've seen insider threat come from a number of organizations. We'll show you an example in a second. In terms of it being included into the ransom for sharing credentials, right? Absolutely expediting access into an environment to actually conduct and complete a ransom attack. We've seen very sophisticated voice systems used for cloning, in authorized company representative roles. And again, very, very, very quick, very high levels of accuracy, 98, 99%. And that then linked into email spoofing, which doesn't actually tweak email security policies, spoofing domains. So you get an email from yourself and people have a level of curiosity to click on that link. It doesn't get a non-delivery report, an NDR. And again, people obviously receiving an email from themselves, they weren't sure they click on it, and again, you're into the compromise taking place. So again, this is taking the next level of deception, and we're looking at making the authenticity validation really, really difficult. So there are lots of layers, and they move around in terms of engineering deceit. There is a foundational layer with this research that's being done, the context that's being understood, how it's going to get built up, what the backstory is to the engagement, whether it be, professional or helpfulness. There'll be a normalization as that takes place, making reasonable, not unreasonable asks. And then again, just understanding from a deceptor point of view, what the timing needs to be, how to avoid somebody trying to extend that time, pause for thought, go into a critical thinking process and look at verification. And again, ultimately a really simple action. Just click on this link. And, that in itself needs to move through the process, from a human nature point of view. The attacker will be learning each time they do those attacks. And again, what the deceivers are trying to do is avoid that critical thinking element of thought process actually being activated. And that person really looking at the 5-second rule, the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why, as to, breaking down the attack or understanding the deceit or the authenticity of what is being asked or being sent to them to click on. And you can see this in learning from incidents that have taken place recently. So some of you may be aware there's obviously a trading platform called Coinbase. And earlier this year, the international support staff were bribed to leak sensitive customer data, which included names, email addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, masked bank accounts, and ID images. And then they were ransomed for $20 million. And the business understandably said, look, no negotiation. Their statement's really, really clear. They just flipped it and said, look, we're cooperating closely with law enforcement to pursue the harshest penalties possible, and we won't pay the ransom. Instead, we're establishing a $20 million bounty. And, that information is for the arrest and conviction of the criminals. And their SEC 8K filing said that the cost of that breach would be somewhere between 180 and 400 million in remediations and voluntary reimbursements to customers. So you can see the insider risk element absolutely coming through in terms of what's taken place. But also our accelerated use of AI has consequences here. So this is McDonald's. And here we've got a chatbot called Olivia, and it's AI powered. Unfortunately, it hadn't gone fully into production because the bug hunters were doing some final tests and they discovered a vulnerability actually in Olivia where a stale admin account was still there, still secured with a clear text password, but it had no MFA protection. Now, if that had gone into production, it would have exposed 64 million job applicants and CVs with their credentials. So it had the potential to be a very, very, very significant issue. Again, it's just the basics of understanding AI developments and doing the security checks and validations on that before these are put out, because if that was out there, the deceiver would have absolutely seized upon that, and they are doing that. They are scanning it. They know that organizations aren't doing those quality control checks. Well, let's come closer to home here in the UK. So there's obviously been a lot of headlines with regards to retail organizations. Now, there were a number of retail organizations. Some are in the public domain, some less so. And they were all affected by an organization called Scattered Spider around about the same time. So the playbook of the attack and the deception was almost identical. It's impersonation of a system admin employee using sophisticated, security access controls, in some cases voice cloning. And again, the ultimate goal here was to gain access into their systems, lateral movement, and severe ransomware-based execution. The vectors were beginning early in 2025. The organization Scattered Spider. In some cases, they contacted third-party support services that were partners within there and asked for the reset of system admin account passwords. And they cleared all the relevant processes. From there was lateral movement, was undetected, exfiltration of credential databases. And over a number of weeks, those credentials were used but undetected in occurrence, until the 24th of April, when another organization, Dragon Force actually did the ransomware payload execution. And they executed that by encrypting multiple hypervisor servers as well as critical business systems. Now, Marks and Spencer quite rightly have refused to confirm whether any ransom has been paid. They have rebuilt systems. They didn't deal directly with the threat actors. Dragon Force has been very public in this, obviously, but no data has officially been leaked to the website. Marks and Spencers have been very clear what the impact of this has been to them as an organization, as has the co-op. And they were affected in different ways, but you're probably aware that Harrods was an organization affected by exactly the same attack at exactly the same time, but the effects were different. So why? Where's the difference in deception and indeed identification? Well, for Harrods, exactly the same playbook, exactly the same threat actor. But they detected the unauthorized access request because of employee vigilance, right? They immediately took a step to take all systems offline, okay, and isolated them for scanning and took a prevent rather than recover approach. For the co-op, they saw the attack vector early as well, right? They saw the lateral movement and they moved immediately into instant response, but it was harder for them to take their systems offline as fast as Harrods did. That is super high impact. But that's what we've got to be thinking about now in terms of cyber protection and cyber protocols for understanding the deception techniques that are being used. And if they are successful, and hopefully we can put protocols in place to stop this, but if they are successful, we need to consider what are very, very high business impact decisions in terms of isolation and protecting business operations. I am going to involve my colleague John here because we're going into the Fakery workshop at this point. So we promised everybody, John, a deepfake. So here we go. I said, do your best. Go find some public content. I didn't give you anything. I said, go deepfake me, right? Let's see what you can do. And, on the left-hand side, you took the source footage. This is me with a gentleman called Michael Knight, where we're doing a very healthcare, cyber security related public available video, which is on LinkedIn, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so talk us through this then. So you picked that content up on LinkedIn. What did you do with it?
So the basic idea for this deepfake was to go down the route of a fairly low barrier to entry. Using stuff that's freely available, basically. So the source footage was a podcast from yourself, freely available on LinkedIn. And the first thing to do was just grab a LinkedIn downloader and pull down the video. Once we had the video, then we could start actually starting to fake stuff. And it's worth mentioning that this one is obviously quite a targeted one on yourself. So it's slightly different category. But basically what you do is you go around the premise that you need to clone the audio and take the video and get the audio to match the video. So we're going to get you to say something you weren't going to say.
Okay, so that's the top in the audio. So you're building the audio separate to the video, which is the bottom one. So you're understanding what I'm saying, and then you're matching that up and putting that through voice recognition and generating separate audio. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, split the video out, grab the audio sample of yourself, stick that into a tool. In this case, I'm using 11 Labs, which is all browser based. You can go and play with for free. So again, quite a low bar to entry. And it requires about 10 seconds worth of audio to start building up a clone, which is scary.
Yeah, it is absolutely scary. And let's be honest with everybody, no specific hardware. There isn't funky hardware here. And, most of these accounts you're using in the tools you're using are free or nearly free to use.
Yeah, free. A lot of them don't have things like verification steps. So you can use free emails, throwaway emails. You can generate something quickly. Oh, if it doesn't work, just trash the email, start again with another one. Upload, free to use, very low bar for entry, and only a small snippet of good audio is needed.
Okay, so about 3 seconds typically. So some would say in this case you've got more, and for very public people, they'll have a lot more out there. So this in itself, to you, how many iterations do you reckon you did to get to one that you were happy with?
I tend to be a little bit particular, but I would say in general you can go through about 4 or 5 iterations and you'll have something that you could use. It'll depend on the use case. I mean, obviously, if you're going to send it to someone who talks to yourself quite a lot, Matt, I might have to do a few more just to get, the nuances of the accent. But if you're sending it to, say, a financial employee who doesn't speak to you that often, 3 or 4 iterations and you should be fine.
Okay. Yeah. So let's actually delight the audience here and actually go to the next page, shall we? And then we can actually look at this and see the output from the Fakery workshop from John. So here we go.
Hey, it's Matt Lovell. Hope you are well today. My team noted an unusual transaction and activity against your finance system, and I wanted to verify this with you. There are a number of transactions which appear duplicated. Now, this may well be correct, but it has flagged as suspicious trend behavior. I will send over some transaction files to highlight the line items in question to view. Thanks.
Okay, so we haven't got a vote or a poll here, but for everybody's benefit, that's been created. I had no knowledge of that before we put this webinar together. I hadn't seen that, so John and the team have pulled that together. I love the fact that my lips and my teeth are so white. That's the plus side. I'll comb my hair better next time. But thanks for trying your best to do something with me. But I think overall, very, very high level of accuracy there, John. In a very short space of time. How much time do you think you invested in doing it end to end?
End to end, probably about hour and a half.
Okay.
That's from downloading, clipping, creating audio, syncing, and packaging up at the end. An hour and a half, and that was just me being a bit fussy, to be honest.
Okay. So for everybody's benefit, we have, in an hour and a half, we have generated content which, even going back to the 1% rule, right? And it's going to be higher than that, where we've done deepfakes as part of tabletop simulations for customers with their approval, I hasten to add. And, John and the team have pulled those together. We've got over 10% click-through rates, right? So 10% is still a very considerable amount, is genuine enough, whether you're a new starter in the business or somebody not familiar with somebody in a much bigger business. That's a really big challenge, right? So deepfake, in terms of deception, is going to become a rapidly increasing problem. You can see there from John and the team that we've done an hour and a half's worth of work, and we're already underway with a really credible example to take forward. So we'll pick on Jav next. So obviously Jav, super high profile in terms of LinkedIn. We know LinkedIn is the key source here. His number one connection, thank God, is me. But again, on the next video, we're going to take Jav, we're going to break that down. But what we can see here is the art of the pretext, which is very much taking everything that you've done there, John, and actually putting that into the reconnaissance process. So deep research on Jav, as a create the angle of attack, how we're going to evolve that, what are the actual deceptions that we're going to use, a fabricated scenario. So we might go to Jav and say, hey, Jav, you won another award or something like that. But again, it's just using those angles, even the deep fake that you can put there together, John. Establish identity, somebody that might not have met Jav, might not have met me, how are you going to discern whether or not it's genuine or not? Various email techniques, plausible or unplausible, using fuzzing. So going past really getting other people to come back with information, or even building rapport with those contacts where you want to obviously impersonate one of us. But then extracting information, deeper understanding. You've seen with a lot of these attacks they've got on the inside, they've understood security, infrastructure, architecture, products, configurations, workflows, key sysadmin people to move those attacks forward. So as you begin to pull all this deception together, it becomes very, very important that we think about how to defend against this. And, a key part of what the deceit has got to bypass is the verification, the critical thinking process, making it true when it's actually false. The most common deceptions we're seeing right now, to help guide you, system admin, we've been through those, MFA, password resets and token hijacking. So look at your verification policies for those elevated privileged accounts. HR, unfortunately, being very heavily targeted around the impersonation of phishing emails. They're very, very trusted people in the organization, whether they wear that hat or numerous hats. And finance, always being high on the profile list, but deepfakes becoming increasingly difficult to detect. Again, look at verified change in processes, invoices, contracts, and remittance notices. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, happy to answer that in the chat, and the team will help me understand those questions. If you need any help at cloudguard.ai. Just a bit of an ask. If you've enjoyed this webinar with myself, John, and the team, The Art of Deception, we'll be back in Fight Back Against the Fakes. If you want to be part of that, where we talk about understanding the tech to help us, that is at the end of November. Just use the QR code and we'll take you through. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for hanging in there today. Hope it was interesting. Any questions, happy to answer them. Yeah, great question. Very, very common question. So really challenging is the first sort of answer to that question. What we've got to do is populate out applications where they're using safe links. What that's reliant upon is using a central source. So it's getting to a highly consolidated central source and threat enrichment that's identified that tiny URL as being related to malicious activity. Typically anywhere in the globe. That can happen within 10, 20, or even 30 minutes. So if you are sent, obviously, a LinkedIn link and it's been reported, it's obviously got to be reported by somebody as potentially malicious. And that's another reason that people that do click on it and, it becomes malicious, we strongly encourage them to use the report button as well, whether it's LinkedIn, any other social platforms. All of that feeds into that central repository of information. And safe link applications, whatever you've got, if you've got them, obviously, we'll pick up on that. What you've got to be thinking about if you don't is actually looking at more safe links and link security checking applications. Obviously, that's going through DNS. We've had quite a week with different DNS issues. So people will be very, heightened and sensitive to that matter. But again, it's looking at that and ensuring that those links are safe, particularly where you're using an application that might fall outside of, agent-based security within the corporation. You might be remote working, and using a browser or bring your own device. So again, we've got to think about the coverage of how safe links are going to work across mobile and corporate, non-corporate devices. But happy to chat in more detail about what that would look like in terms of policy. So most organizations are currently updating their guidelines, and you have to accept within those guidelines that the authenticity of both image-based content and particularly video, deepfake-based content is really difficult to determine. So at this stage, that most organizational policies will be supportive to the employee, where they have been deceived and absolutely deceived. Yes, there will be obviously the standard investigation, particularly in a compliance or a regulation centric organization like financial services. But what you've got to do is work with employees to build trust over a longer period of time. It is going to become a bigger problem. And therefore, organizations need to provide more guardrails and more guidelines to employees to identify and support organizations with improved security. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's not good enough right now. It needs to rapidly enhance, because detecting deep fakes, and it's happened to very big organizations already, is extremely difficult. So we have to embrace this problem together and organizationally with employees, rather than there being direct consequences for getting it wrong. It is very, very difficult to authenticate and verify. Thank you, everybody. We do hope that you've enjoyed that. We hope the content was interesting and engaging. We welcome your feedback. We welcome your feedback in terms of putting together more content in the future. We welcome you to sign up for the next webinar, Fighting Back Against the Fakes, where we're going to take this to the next level and look very much along those lines of defense. So thank you again, and stay safe.